The murder weapon inevitably struck the indifferent surface of water and with a silent scream disappeared in the monstrous depth of the lake. On its face, the scars of the crime were left. Imperfect circles of waves' wrinkles were running from the place of the hit and were collapsing when they met the dead body. Beautiful and peculiar, even though it was only halfway to perfection. For the first time in his life, the old detective, bobbing on the annoyed water, understood why witnesses always said, "It happened so fast." Maybe because you never expect this to happen. The scissors of greed, envy, jealousy, revenge, anger, frivolity, or chance unhesitatingly close their ends, breaking the thread of life. Always ruthless, always pointless. The detective swam closer to the dead body and, despite her tangled black hair, carefully wrapped his long neck around the neck of the curious girl he had met just a couple of hours ago. She obviously wasn't breathing. He couldn't feel the pulse in her veins. Realizing that, he hugged her with his neck.
Very soon, her body gets cold forever.
He knew this from books that he had read. Now, when he witnessed for the first time the moment of death taking a soul out of the body, he wanted to give her one last act of kindness, one last act of love. Maybe this is something that he was missing in his life. Strangely enough, it was him who showed humanity, being far from human, in response to such a cruel act of murder.
Regrets made me older and too sentimental.
He told himself.
Regrets and sorrows.
He suddenly raised his head and looked around. Carefully, with a cold eye, he scanned the surrounding area and continued the monologue in his feathered head.
Spare now to put emotions aside, so as not to regret missing the opportunity to find the killer.
The setting sun turned the horizon blood red, but the apathetic darkness sought to fill the evening sky with its cold. It seemed that the wind was also driving the sun away, playing with the foliage of the dark trees and disturbing the already tired and worried surface of the lake. But the sun was in no hurry to go away, and so was the old detective, even in the twilight of his years. He carefully studied those who happened to be near the lake. Clockwise, he observed a man who put aside his binoculars on the bird-watching tower, either laughing, crying, or having an epileptic seizure. A girl folded over and collecting sticks on the lawn, likely for a campfire, and a boy aiming to throw the collected sticks and scatter them just for fun. A father and a daughter was running clumsily into the forest. A cyclist was standing on a hill, taking a photo of the lake. A fisherman, fussing with a fishing rod, who apparently mistook the splash from the kill for the sound of the catch pecking.
One question. What might be the reaction of someone who just killed an innocent creature? Flee the scene like the father and daughter or the fisherman? Pretend nothing happened like the girl and the guy? Or give in to emotions like the man on the tower? Maybe take a photo of your crime as a keepsake like the cyclist? What would the murderer do if they didn't suspect that a detective bird was watching? No, it's pointless to predict the criminal's reaction.
The detective reasoned.
It depends on whether the crime was intentional or accidental, planned or spontaneous, and to a huge extent under criminal psychology. Perhaps it is worth sticking to the most reliable and time-tested method, almost as old as I am. Motive and opportunity. That's what I should focus on.
He concluded.
Regarding the opportunity, it seems that everyone present had it. It would be enough to just throw a heavier stone and the job is done. The motive could even be missing or completely absurd. People like to do stupid things just for fun, don't they? Isn't it fun chasing pigeons on the streets? Or to catch insects and dissect them? Or isn't it fun trying to step on a cat's tail? Or to let a dog eat a piece of sausage tied to a string and then pull it out? Or isn't it fun to throw a stone at a bird to see if it can dodge or not?
The detective looked towards the father and daughter, who had already disappeared into the forest.
Children. They can be both the sweetest and the most cruel creatures. Sometimes it seems that children are still completely unfamiliar with what is called empathy and compassion. It is understandable, because from birth they only know themselves. They only know about their desires and needs, the satisfaction of which they demand by inexorable screaming or crying. And their needs are always met. Trying to negotiate with a small child is a pointless activity. Parents have to follow their lead. And as a result, they have no choice but to raise the child a little spoiled and selfish. Selfishness is so childish.
Concluded the detective. Reflecting on it, he couldn't help but remember his chicks squeaking from hunger. His partner gave them her all, feeding, watering, caressing, and protecting them. He, ever the realist, did not want to, or perhaps could not, invest too much of his energy in the children. After all, in just a few years, they grew up, got stronger, and simply left the parental nest, never to return. They broke their mother's heart, which ached and longed for even a little of their attention. His heart was, in contrast, completely safe. He didn't get attached to them because he was always aware of the distance between them.
Indeed,
He thought.
children can be very cruel.
The detective exhaled heavily, shaking his feathery head on his long neck. At that moment, an eagle descended majestically from the sky and painfully struck the detective's feathered head with its beak.
We have assigned you a simple task to observe the few people in the vicinity of this small people-watching lake, but somehow you managed to allow the murder here.
The eagle scolded the detective in disappointment.
What happened? Who was there?
The detective, of course, starting with the phrase most often repeated by witnesses, humbly described the events that took place, mentioning all those who were near the lake at that moment.
I'm inclined to believe that it was a little girl.
The detective continued, deciding to share his reasoning.
I remember that before the incident, she was just throwing stones into the water, competing with her father in skipping stones. But I wouldn't rule out a fisherman either. His catch was small, and I think he saw us as his competitors. He kept trying to scare me off when I swam too close. A couple on the lawn, I noticed, were playing frisbee while I was chatting with a stranger. Moreover, they played quite actively and aggressively. I think the frisbee could have flown away and hit the victim on the head hard enough. The other two suspects, the man on the birdwatching tower and the cyclist, I don't remember much about. Although the cyclist was taking a photo of the lake when a stranger was killed. I think a narcissistic killer would definitely want to capture this moment to show off to his friends.
I have no doubt that it is exactly what you would do.
After listening attentively to his duty, the eagle replied irritably.
How many times have I told you that in order to solve a case, you should be impartial and not transfer your experience and characteristics to others? And more importantly, to not jump to conclusions too quickly. You have remained, as you were, very impatient and judgmental.
The eagle finished and screamed something shrilly in avian. A few moments later, a little egret, who had been quietly observing the lake all this time, was joined by a gadwall, a pair of crows, a yellow-legged gull, and a western marsh harrier. They gathered around him, their eyes sharp and inquisitive. The eagle assigned each of them to follow the suspect. He understood all too well that no one should be excluded. In order to spare the egret another flight, the eagle positioned her next to a couple collecting wood for a campfire. The harrier, swift and vigilant, was dispatched to watch over the child and her father. The crows, ever eager, volunteered to shadow the cyclist. They were quite taken with a tanned man with curly hair. A peculiar man, already leaving the bird-watching tower, found himself accompanied by an equally peculiar gadwall. Meanwhile, the ever-diligent gull was tasked with following the fisherman. Everyone who was at the lake that evening was under supervision. The eagle itself remained on the lake.
The murder weapon.
He mused.
It is definitely worth finding out what it was. It is foolish, of course, to believe that someone could have thrown a heavy enough stone into the center of the lake. In addition, it is unlikely that it can be done with high precision to hit a small bird. On the other hand, the stone could have stunned her, while the murder was committed in a completely different way.
Already immersed in thought about the case, the eagle deftly put his strictly white head under the water, and after talking with local residents, found volunteers who agreed to look for strange new objects at the bottom of the lake. Either the murder weapon will be found, or it will have to be assumed that the perpetrator resorted to a more sophisticated method. In any case, the gears of the justice machine have started to turn. It was time to interrogate the witnesses. Apparently, the wayward detective was the only one who knew at least something about the victim.
She was an absolutely extraordinary person.
The detective replied to the eagle's question.
When we met, she asked me an extremely unusual question.
The detective explained, reproducing the details of their conversation.
She was confused, didn't understand where the reality was and where the dream was. The poor thing has completely lost her memory, but I,
The detective proudly craned his neck.
certainly helped her figure it out. She was impressed by my stories. They reminded her of how wonderful it was when her friends were here by the lake with her. She was starting to remember and becoming herself again.
Yes. I see that she was literally starting to become herself.
The eagle noted, casting his sharp gaze at the dead body. The detective sighed regretfully.
I think she was going to thank me before she wanted to fly away. But at that very moment, death caught up with her. Awful. Death is always on her heels, slowly, without speeding up, but also without slowing down. It is inexorably approaching. We can run, fly, drag, crawl, but it won't change its speed or its direction, and it will always catch up with us. That's who's really ruthless and cruel. This is the enemy that needs to be fought.
The detective summed up his story.
I understand
The eagle began.
that you are no longer young and regret that you did not do anything significant in life for which you could be remembered. If you had only made at least a small but significant contribution, we would have extended your lifespan. But alas, you were stuck in your bubble of self-conceit and did not want to listen to anyone, and still do not want to listen,
Said the eagle after finishing the interrogation and flapping his wide, strong wings, meeting the wind with a brave chest, headed towards the egret to clarify the details of the story that the detective told him.
Egrets, like herons, are exceptional observers. They can stand in the lake for hours, waiting for a good opportunity. And they are incredibly curious. They always like to stick their long beak and with it their nose into other people's business. If my memory serves me right, then it was for the immodest curiosity that both herons and egrets were sent to sit forever in people watching lakes. There's nothing you can do against your nature.
The eagle flew up to the egret at a very bad time. The most interesting thing about watching a couple of suspects on the lawn was just beginning. Therefore, the egret really did not want to be distracted from watching them. The girl was lying on the lawn with her arms and legs up, creating 4 supports on which the boy was apparently going to climb. Less gracefully than a bird would have done, but no less successfully. Nevertheless, it seemed to Egret that these two should now be left alone, which only fueled her curiosity. But she still had to be distracted by the questions of the proudly flying eagle.
My neck is very tired of turning from side to side tonight.
The egret began, twisting her long neck.
You know, extremely interesting events took place both on the lawn and in the center of the lake. This guy, for example, was testing his girlfriend's patient all the time. He would jump over her like over a goat, then slap her with the back of his hand, then laugh at her cute awkwardness, then even launch a frisbee right into her head. Either by accident or on purpose, I kept wondering how she put up with it. But, you know, people say hitting means loving. The couple in the middle of the lake, on the other hand, was more interesting to listen to than to watch them. They had a very philosophical conversation, and as it should be. It was peaceful and serene. I remember it almost completely. You will certainly be interested in listening to it,
said the egret, who got into the excitement of retelling the stories she heard, like a gossip. She was very fond of rumors and gossip. Her brain seemed to be perfectly tuned to accurately remember and reproduce stories heard from third parties. Therefore, it was easy for her to tell the eagle what was said that evening in the middle of the lake, and even with what intonation.
You must agree, these two are worth each other.
After finished retelling the dialogue between the detective and the victim, the little egret said, swallowing saliva to moisten her long throat, which was dry from a long story.
Although by the end of the conversation, I heard that the poor girl was unhappy about something. They started arguing loudly with the detective. Naturally, when the passions began to heat up, I turned my head to them. But she was already lying motionless on the wet surface of the water, and the detective wrapped his neck around her neck, either hugging her or trying to strangle her.
The egret dramatically claimed. The eagle was not surprised by the contradictory description of the end of the conversation that he heard from the lips of the detective and the egret. All the details have been perfectly put together so far, but as the Germans say, sicher ist sicher. Therefore, for reliability, it was worth eliminating suspects step by step.
Have you seen a couple from the lawn throwing something maybe towards the center of the lake?
He asked dispassionately.
No, I didn't see anything like that. The kid may seem cruel, but he's just showing off. I remember when he noticed me. He drew his girlfriend's attention to me with his already familiar slap. Both of them froze and stood for a few minutes very sweetly and peacefully side by side in silence, admiring, as I want to believe, my beauty and elegance. I doubt they would want to harm nature, but the fisherman who was sitting on the opposite shore in a thicket of cattails was such a cruel person. I initially hid there, in that part of the lake this evening, because I know there are more delicious fish there. And when he showed up, he just persistently began to drive me away from my place. Shame on him. I have nothing more to say. I wasn't stubborn and moved away from him, but closer to the lawn.
Just at the end of the story, a gull flew up to the egret and the eagle, returning very quickly from tracking the fisherman. The only significant observation that the gull made about the fisherman was that, on the way home on a bicycle, he crashed into a pole and fell into a ditch. And when he drove up a small hill, he jerked forward so sharply and strongly that he almost tipped over with the bike back. In short, he behaved extremely clumsily and irrationally.
Thank you,
the eagle said to the gull and mentally crossed off another suspect from the list.
It's absolutely impossible,
thought the eagle,
that a drunk fisherman could accurately hit a bird in the middle of the lake with anything. Perhaps alcohol turned out to be something useful, but only as an alibi. Someday, people will stop poisoning themselves with alcohol, cigarettes, exhaust fumes, and self-deception.
After completing the collection of information from the witness, the eagle was pleased that his hopes for the curiosity of the little egret were justified and that he could already exclude 3 of 8 suspects. The testimony of the egret helped him to draw up a clear sequence of actions that occurred a couple of hours ago. The eagle, despite his strict and severe appearance, was at heart, as it often happens, a very creative person and a subtle psychologist. Therefore, it was not difficult for him to present in detail a picture of the events preceding the sad death of the girl. The eagle liked to think not only with his sophisticated mind, but also when his powerful body was occupied with work. With a flutter of his wide wings, he soared into the air. During the flight, he drew such a picture of events in his head. It all started, as the detective said, with an extremely curious question.
Do you know how many feathers should be in a bird's wing?
asked the graceful stranger.
Do you know how many stars there are in the night sky?
An old detective who liked to talk in riddles answered the question with a question. By his age, he was tired of empty and useless conversations, so he tried to dismiss, in his opinion, uninteresting people with confusing questions. The stranger swam back slightly, as if she was literally pushed away by the detective's indifferent response. But there was no one else around to ask, so she looked at the still warm evening sky and tried to give an interesting answer to a really interesting question.
Once, I tried to count the stars.
The stranger replied.
I hoped it would help me fall asleep. You know that if one has problems with sleeping, one should do something meaningless and monotonous. And what could be more meaningless and monotonous than trying to count the stars? After all, their number varies with time and location.
The old detective turned his feathered head curiously towards the stranger. Apparently, she passed the first test and was honored by his attention. The stranger continued her reasoning.
But considering these snow-white dots in the dark sky, I wondered, why are they needed at all? Poetically speaking, who lights these stars every night? For example, it doesn't matter to me if there are stars tonight or not. I don't really need them. And yet, they are there. Does this mean that someone needs them?
I think you've answered your question.
The detective said, taking advantage of the philosophical pause that hung in the humid air. The stranger turned her tiny snow-white head towards him uncomprehendingly.
The number of feathers on the wings of birds varies from bird to bird, and it is obvious that there are too many of them to easily count. But unlike the stars, your feathers serve quite clear purposes: to help with flight, to protect from water, to improve the streamlining of the wing. And what exactly is the reason for your interest in the number of feathers on your wings? Are you going to count them on starless nights?
The detective asked. The graceful stranger doubted whether she should confide in him or move on and deal with her dilemma herself. She hesitated. Lately, she was very tired of talking in riddles and wanted to answer questions simply and directly. What difference does it make to her what others think of her? In the end, she just wants to be herself and for others to accept her for who she is. So she decided that telling the truth, no matter how ridiculous it was, would be better than prevaricating and making things up.
I'm confused where the dream is and where the reality is.
She began.
You see, I often have nightmares. For example, one day I was sitting under a blanket in an armchair and was completely paralyzed while a demon was creeping up on me. I felt him flying closer and closer as his cold paws moving from my legs to my neck, and there was nothing I could do about it. But I've learned to control my dreams. Lucid dream. Have you heard anything about it?
The stranger asked rhetorically. The detective's face was expressionless. She continued.
If you realize that you are in a dream, then you can control it. But I think I'm confused. I'm really confused about where the dream is and where the reality is.
She lowered her head, looking at her reflection in the peaceful surface of the lake.
Here, I wake up in the body of a bird near a bird-watching tower. This place seems so familiar to me. I feel like I am at home, peaceful and calm. But when I fall asleep here, I wake up in a human body in another place. Very strange, rocky and cold. There is something missing for me. I am haunted by a very strange, disturbing feeling. I absolutely do not want to go back there, because it seems to me that there is a real nightmare there, and my real life is here.
The graceful stranger roused herself, shaking off the frightening thoughts, making the water around her worry, and turned her gaze to the detective.
How do you understand where the dream is and where the reality is?
He asked a clarifying question in an even tone.
I'm counting my fingers there. I always have 5 of them on each hand, just like other people. If it turns out that I have, for example, 7 fingers on one hand, then I understand that this is a dream. Here, following the same logic, I decided to count the feathers.
Completely illogical.
The detective said critically.
First of all, it will be easier for you to count your toes here. For birds like you and me, there are usually only 4 of them on each foot. And secondly, what makes you think that if people in that world have 5 fingers on their hand, then this is normal? What surprises me most about people is how quickly they accept as normal what just happens often, and in different parts of the world. For some reason, their critical thinking turns off, and the abnormal quickly becomes the norm.
Thoughtfully, the graceful stranger lifted her paw out of the water and counted 4 toes.
Does this mean that people don't have 5 fingers on their hand?
The stranger asked in surprise.
This means that your method is absolutely stupid.
The detective replied irritably, looking away from the stranger to the side. It was not difficult for him to maintain eye contact with the other person, but he did not like it when it became uncomfortable. Therefore, when someone started to annoy him, he looked away.
So, how do I figure out where the dream is and where the reality is?
Exhaling heavily and already generously forgiving the stranger for her stupidity, the detective naturally appealed to rationalism.
You see, there must be logic in everything. Everything has a cause and effect. I learned this very well during my first case as a detective.
He proudly craned his neck and froze, expecting that the stranger would certainly be impressed by this. He really liked to make an impression, so he often talked with new people, because it was easier to surprise them. But the graceful stranger did not seem to understand that such a reaction was expected of her. Being unsure of what exactly to do, she shook her head understandingly and maintained eye contact, saying,
Interesting.
This gave her a couple of seconds to collect her thoughts and finally return the conversation to the direction she was interested in.
So, how do I distinguish between a dream and reality?
Think,
Exclaimed the detective.
reflect, build logical chains, ask questions and find answers, and be skeptical to anything, especially to things that are considered to be normal.
He continued energetically.
Let me teach you.
The detective suggested with a twinkle in his eyes. He was very impressed with this idea. He knew that he was extremely good, not only at solving crimes, but also at teaching.
This birdwatching tower, for example. Do you know what people build it for?
The stranger hesitated with the answer. It seemed to her that this was a trick question, because the very name of the bird-watching tower clearly indicates the purpose of the existence of this tower. Deciding that the detective didn't have the patience for another stupid answer, she just looked at him questioningly. The detective, not paying any attention to her reaction and not expecting, in general, any meaningful thought from a stranger, has already entered into the excitement of telling another story from his life. He really enjoyed sharing stories that demonstrated his erudition, ingenuity, and simply impressed listeners. He loved to amuse his ego, even though he wasn't really selfish at heart.
I remember my son was asked at school to prepare a project about people. And because his mother was busy getting food, I had to help him with his homework. This subject, human studies, is considered one of the most difficult. It is understandable. You know how important it is for birds to understand human nature well. This is exactly why we were exiled to Earth, to observe and to report to higher authorities.
The detective said with a touching smile, already irrevocably immersed in warm memories. The graceful stranger listened with interest to the unusual story. It turns out that her absurd nightmare story is not so absurd in this world.
He and I just chose the phenomenon of birdwatching towers as the theme of the project. This is really a very interesting idea. On the one hand, we create lakes as reference points for observing people. On the other hand, they are building towers next to our reservoirs to monitor us. Are they just copying us? What do you think?
The detective asked, directing an expectant look at the stranger.
It seems to me that people like to be inspired by nature and borrow some ideas from it. But usually they do it to solve some task in order to gain efficiency, for example.
The stranger reasoned.
But in the case of birdwatching towers, it seems that there is no great thought behind it. except to admire the life of birds. It is possible to measure the number and monitor the state of the biosphere, but I can't think of anything more hidden behind the construction of these towers.
You have just reproduced our reasoning.
The detective exclaimed joyfully.
That's what we thought too. But can such unreasonableness be consistent with the huge number of towers around the world?
The detective continued to test the stranger's intelligence.
I don't think it's common for people to do something on a large scale and all over the world without any strong reason.
The stranger replied.
That's right. I was so caught up in this mystery that I decided to find the answer immediately and told my son that for a school project, pointing out the contemplation of nature as the reason would be fine. I was already looking forward to the beginning of the investigation. It would be an ideal case for admission to the Academy of Detectives.
Drawing a sequence of events in his head based on witness testimony, the eagle stopped. Hunger distracted him from this activity. He didn't have time to eat something substantial, so he decided to have a snack, no matter how much anyone judged him. He's a busy bird. He needs to solve the case.
Funny.
He thought, collecting insects with his mouth at high speed and watching cyclists passing near the lake at high speed too, but with their mouths closed.
Someday, people will understand that you need to ride a bike with your mouth open.
He realized affirmatively, swallowing insects. Having refreshed himself, the eagle continued to analyze the events that led to the death of the graceful stranger, continuing from the place where he left off, with a story about the bird-watching towers. He himself, of course, remembered well the mystery that the detective was talking about. It was indeed an impressive investigation, so there was no choice but to take him to the academy, even though his first attempt was shameful and failed. The eagle couldn't help but laugh again, remembering how this young eccentric in feathers came to report on his very first case for admission to the Academy of Detectives, the case of the missing schnitzel.
Schnitzels are disappearing in hostels all over Australia.
The young eccentric in feathers began his speech in front of the admission committee to the Academy of Detectives.
Tourists come to Australia, settle in an affordable hostel, buy groceries to save money and not spend a lot of it on eating out. And then, unsuspectingly, they leave their food in the refrigerator. The next day, the schnitzel will certainly disappear from there. I noted in chronological order in which hostels the schnitzels disappeared. And it is obvious that there is a criminal operating here, who is gradually moving east to the Great Coral Reef. And what if, when the criminal gets there, the marine life begins to disappear instead of schnitzels? It became clear to me that I couldn't wait any longer. I set up an ambush in the only hostel left, on the way to the reef, and kept my eyes on the refrigerator all night.
The young eccentric in feathers made a meaningful phrase.
Please continue.
The eagle said in an indifferent voice.
It was a somnambulist. A teenage girl in pink pajamas walked in her sleep, went to the refrigerator, found a schnitzel, put it in the oven, and, waiting for it to warm up, ate it whole. I think that these night socks of hers can easily explain her plump cheeks.
The young eccentric in feathers proudly straightened up and finished his report.
How naive and inexperienced he was then.
Mused the eagle, cutting through the air over the lake.
At that time, I criticized him too harshly for the lack of social significance of his case, for the lack of other evidence indicating that in previous cases the schnitzel was taken by the same girl, and in principle for the lack of thorough detective work. Of course, I told him then. We don't expect that when you enter the academy, you will certainly solve a murder, but the case must at least be intriguing and significant. Because of such a disgrace, that young eccentric in feathers fled to the other side of the world out of shame. Yeah, I shouldn't have been so callous to those who sincerely sought to help bring justice to the world.
The eagle muttered.
But no one taught me to sympathize. I was only taught to be demanding of both others and myself.
The eagle said with a heavy sigh.
Nevertheless, this weirdo did a good job, and that girl who, albeit unconsciously, ate other people's schnitzels at night was justly punished by the heavenly office. The sin of insatiability was laid like a stone on her soul. Inevitably, People unconsciously do what they secretly desire the most. And impure thoughts cannot be forgiven, as practice shows. A thought always becomes a word becomes a deed, and a deed becomes a way of life. I got distracted.
The eagle rightly noted and called his agents back with a loud shout. They perched comfortably on a rock near the lake. At each other's interruption, all the birds made chaos and noise, except for the crows, who were surprisingly quietly waiting for their turn.
To order!
The eagle asked sternly.
Crows, you are the first. You behave more or less decently. What can you tell us about the cyclist?
Oh, he's just a holy man, holier than even the holiest Disney princess. He dances well and does not hesitate to sing, and birds nest at his window and raise their chicks there. They say that their chicks always have an example of an ideal person in front of their eyes, and he does not eat animal meat and only drinks soy milk, and he donates blood.
With more and more passion, the crows continued.
And he invites friends to visit him, and he shares everything with everyone, and he helps all passers-by if they ask for it, and he refuses to play badminton with a friend because the poor geese involuntarily sacrificed their wonderful feathers to the shuttlecock. In general, he is a kind-hearted person, sunny and very positive. He is conscious about his life and the world.
Well, kindness is the main trait of an intelligent person,
said the eagle.
Although you described a painfully perfect picture. Didn't you notice any wrongdoing behind him?
The crows looked at each other, not knowing what to say. One of them began.
It seems...
Yes, it seems.
The second one picked up.
He's lazy!
They said in unison.
Or rather, energy efficient.
The crows said, deciding to turn this trait into a positive one, just in case.
For example, when he came home, he wanted to throw the bike keys on the table, but they fell short and fell on a backpack lying next to it. Obviously, they don't belong there, but he didn't bend down to pick them up and put them back in place.
I see.
The eagle replied indifferently.
What about the man from the bird-watching tower?
He asked Gadwall, who shared with him his hypothesis about the stocky, old, tanned man.
He is not as exemplary a person as a cyclist.
The Gadwall began.
But I think at heart, he's a very sweet and sensitive person with wonderful dreams. Back at the penthouse of the luxury hotel, he pasted a pink heart on top of our city on an old map hanging on the wall. He had a huge number of these hearts all over the planet. There was a particularly large concentration of them near Germany. I think he loves to travel and wants to see as much natural beauty as possible before climate change destroys them all. And he loves family very much. Before leaving the birdwatching tower, he left a photo with his children on it, which he kept in his wallet. Here.
The Gadwall said, handing the photo to the eagle.
I think it's very sweet. Also in his penthouse, he called his son, I think. But I didn't understand what they were talking about. All the sentences seemed to be questions because of the intonation, and the vowel sounds turned into some kind of confusion. He seemed to speak English, but with an accent that was very incomprehensible to me.
The Gadwall finished the story.
Did you notice anything else unusual?
The eagle asked the question without emotion.
He took pills in his penthouse. It was something like melatonin. Apparently he came to Europe recently and wanted to get rid of jet lag. Well, for us, migratory birds, such pills would be very useful.
The Gadwall noted.
Some kind of useless characteristic.
The eagle looked at the photo.
Although his son seems familiar to me. I saw him somewhere.
The eagle thought, but without remembering anything, nervously returned the photo to Gadwall.
What about the father and daughter?
The eagle asked loudly.
The father obviously holds some kind of grudge against the chickens.
The harrier replied in an even voice.
He brought a fried chicken with him on a camping trip. and he and his daughter ate a crispy golden leg of chicken with great appetite. Fragrant meat juice dripped down their lips and fingers. The well-fried skin, soaked in spicy spices, crunched especially loudly. I hope they both die of cholesterol soon.
The harrier commented dispassionately,
The love of fried chicken does not mean bloodlust.
said the eagle.
And these chickens are very stupid. So maybe they deserve to be eaten, at least with a big appetite. Can you tell me something more meaningful about them?
With the exception of fried birds, they treated animals with respect. The deer was not scared of. The hedgehog, hovering on business, was not disturbed. The squirrel was left with nuts under the tree. Even a homemade feeder was hung up, apparently to catch naive birds and then fry them in hot oil.
So, enough guesswork. I only need the facts.
The eagle sternly interrupted him.
Thank you all for the information. Now I need to think.
The eagle dismissed the meeting of agents. The egret returned to the curious contemplation of a couple of supposedly just friends. The gull, hungry, decided to go fishing. The harrier disappeared into the forest in the direction of the father and daughter, apparently hoping to grab at least a small piece of golden fried chicken. The Gedwall walked across the lake to the lonely detective, deciding to keep him company and listen to his guesses about this case. And the crows, as if enchanted, remained stupidly sitting on a stone, not knowing what to do next. The eagle's thoughts returned to the very place where they left off.
Oh, really?
The graceful stranger asked the old detective incredulously.
It's hard to believe, but that's exactly what I told you about. We too easily accept as normal what happens often and everywhere. But it was only one old man, a very rich and a little mad Australian entrepreneur who decided that he wanted to find this wonderful bird. So much so that he sponsored the construction of a huge number of bird-watching towers. This is the incomparably simple information I received as a result of my hard work. I stayed in the library for long, long nights, obsessed with searching for any information about the towers. But neither in historical books, nor on ancient maps, nor even in folk songs, nowhere, and no one mentions these towers. That's when I thought they may have appeared quite recently. Fortunately, tracking a digital footprint is pretty easy nowadays. The only problem is, this trail led me back to Australia.
I would like to visit Australia one day.
The graceful stranger said, shamelessly interrupting the interlocutor.
Especially until the great coral reef is completely extinct due to climate change. It is a pity that people are so carefree about nature and there is no one who could watch them, explain to them that they live on a unique planet and must do so to preserve its greatness and diversity of life forms,
She said regretfully. Ignoring her environmental tirade, the old detective continued.
Believe me, you will hate Australia as much as I do. Not only because of the kangaroos, who purposely jump as high as possible to pull a couple of feathers out of their tail, but also because of the boomerangs forever flying in the sky. The Australians have a thing for them, and for all sorts of poisonous insects. What is wrong with people on this continent? They just love things that can kill you in the blink of an eye. You have to fly there carefully so that you don't get hit by a boomerang launched by some fool, or bitten by some hungry, deadly fly.
The detective said, inflamed with anger.
And it was on this continent that I hated, where one of the first bird-watching towers was built. It's no secret who built it. It's easy to find on the internet. But it was not easy to find out the true motive for the construction. What would you do if you were in my place?
The detective asked, suddenly remembering that the purpose of this story was to teach an elegant stranger to think logically.
Oh!
Realizing that she was required to reason logically, the graceful stranger began.
Let's think logically.
A good start. Come on.
The detective supported the stranger with uncharacteristic enthusiasm.
You needed to find out the motive of the person, even though you are a bird. You couldn't just interrogate him because you don't talk like a human, right?
I like the way you think. Yes, they don't teach detectives human language at the academy.
So it was necessary to find a link between you and the people. It seems that parrots are well suited for such a role.
The stranger said, nodding to convince herself of the correctness of the thought.
That's right. I had to show the exceptional communication skills inherent in any detective to negotiate with the local parrots. As a result, I found one who lived with that Australian businessman a few years ago. Believe it or not, it was a pink parrot. It's the first time I've met someone like that. As the parrot explained to me that the daughter of this entrepreneur simply adored everything pink. She had a pink room, pink clothes, a social media avatar with a pink sky. In short, she probably looked at the world through rose-colored glasses. And her pink parrot said that this entrepreneur was looking for a special bird with a human face. That's why he built bird-watching towers.
A bird with a human face.
The stranger repeated thoughtfully.
For some reason, it seems very familiar to me.
Well, of course, you should have heard this story. It made a noise all over the heavenly office. In short, one of the angels who was going to enter the Academy of Archangels chose as an introductory feat to save students stuck in a German castle. How they got in there and were locked up is anyone's guess. I'm more than sure that one of them just decided to climb through some crack in the wall for fun, and the others, either led by his authority or being led by a competitive spirit, repeated his risky act. But it doesn't matter. The important thing is that this wayward angel flew to save them.
The detective continued with an evil laugh, forgetting about his unsuccessful admission to the Academy of Detectives.
Of course, it would be logical to save them being in human form in order to raise less questions. But this wayward angel couldn't cope with the transformation, so he only had a human head. However, by some miracle, he saved the students one by one, carrying them over the high castle wall. But he couldn't save the last girl. He claimed afterwards at the heavenly court that her soul was just too heavy with sins, and he was too tired.
Heavy with sins?
The stranger asked, interrupting impolitely.
Yes, of course. We must somehow punish people for bad deeds. That's why we watch them. That's why we investigate all the strange cases, in order to punish the guilty injustice and weigh down their souls. So after death, they will not be able to ascend to heaven, and their sins will drag them to hell. In no case should we make mistakes and burden the souls of the innocent. In hell, of course, every mistake we make is welcome, because the more souls they have, the more entertainment they have. But it's important to us that everything is fair. That's why when I found out about it in human studies, I immediately got the idea to become a detective. To unravel the insidious nets set by the devil. To think skeptically, so as not to fall for his sophisticated traps built on coincidences. No wonder people say that the devil is in the details. You should have done it at school too. Have you really forgotten?
Apparently my memory is really bad.
Trying to hide the fact that this was clearly new information for her, the graceful stranger exclaimed theatrically.
And what happened next?
She asked the detective no less affectedly, in order to distract him from his suspicions about her.
This wayward angel, of course, was found guilty of excessive ambition in choosing a task for admission to the academy, negligence in completing the task, and most importantly, the death of a girl whom he couldn't save. She turned out to be the daughter of the Australian entrepreneur who, after her death, maniacally began building birdwatching towers. And if it weren't for my curiosity about these towers, no one from the heavenly office would have found out about the terrible offense.
The old detective proudly straightened up and finished the story. But the graceful stranger had already stopped listening to him. She gazed thoughtfully at the bird-watching tower. For some reason, the story of the bird with the human face was familiar to her. Someone told her about it, but not someone random. No. She doesn't remember the stories that random passers-by tell her, because she doesn't care about them at all. But someone close to her told her the story. Maybe even her friend. An elderly, tanned man with binoculars was climbing the stairs to the tower. The graceful stranger stared at him for a while. Could she have been in his place? Could she have climbed this steep wooden staircase herself? Or maybe with some company? She kept peering and peering into the distance, shifting her gaze from the tower clockwise. A boy and a girl were playing frisbee on the lawn.
Frisbee,
She repeated to herself. Father and daughter were running rocks through the water, trying to make as many circles as possible.
children's games.
She said. A cyclist riding up the hill stopped when he noticed a beautiful bird on the lake.
A bike.
The bird said hypnotically. A fisherman had been sitting on the shore for several hours, hoping that inaction would bring results,
Students.
said a graceful bird with inspiration. Her head rapidly began to grow and acquire human features. The white feathers were falling off, and in their place, curly black hair was sprouting. The thin beak split into a neat nose and red lips. Her eyes widened and filled with tropical warmth instead of cold blue.
I remembered.
She shouted, turning abruptly to the detective.
I was here with my friends. We studied there and came here for a walk, and I felt so good. I was so happy.
She shouted carelessly. The surprised detective, who clearly understood the danger of what was happening, quickly swam up to the bird girl.
Hush, hush, you stupid bird.
The detective said softly, but insistently.
Stop attracting attention.
She calmed down slightly, and with a clear smile on her face repeated, looking into the detective's gray eyes.
I'm starting to remember everything that happened here. How we ran here, how we ate pancakes afterwards, how we walked under the barrier, how we did crazy things on the grass field, how we had fun. Oh, how I want to remember everything in every detail.
Stop it.
The detective replied rudely. The bird girl swam away from him in fright.
I won't even think about it.
Don't you realize that you're turning into a human?
I understand. I finally understand who I am. I'm getting all my memories back. Whoever took them away had no right to do so. These are the best moments of my life, and all of them are mine.
Stop and turn on your tiny brain.
The detective said irritably, switching to raised tones, trying to swim up to the silly bird.
What did I tell you about an angel transformed in front of people? This is strictly forbidden. You will be punished.
What are you talking about? It's all unreal. It's all a dream. Now I know it clearly. I know that my beloved people are waiting for me there in real life. Oh, how I miss the chocolate cherry cake. How I miss the sun dancing. How I miss the eternal source of topics for conversation. How I miss our follies and our hiking. Guys,
She shouted into the soulless, dark sky.
wait for me. I'm flying.
No one is waiting for you there.
The detective shouted.
Fool, stop. I'm saving your life. No friends are waiting for you. It was a long, long time ago. No one cares about you among the people anymore.
How dare you say that?
Painfully slapping a disproportionately long wing, the girl screamed.
I know where the dream is and where the reality is. And you are a dream. So I can make you disappear.
She replied sharply.
Then do it.
The detective said sarcastically. The bird girl twisted her face tensely.
Is it not working?
The detective summed up quite well and calmly continued, trying to convince the bird girl not to make a fatal mistake.
All people are doomed to die, and their souls are doomed to go either to heaven to be reborn as an angel bird, or under the weight of sins to go to eternal torment in hell. Your soul has been reborn. You serve a good and wonderful cause. Don't be afraid. Everything will be fine.
The bird girl looked at him incredulously.
You said there should be logic in everything.
That's right. I'm glad you've learned a lesson.
Then what's the point of taking my memories? Why don't I remember anything about myself?
This is generosity.
The detective retorted.
There is no greater torment in the world than remembering happy times and not being able to experience it again.
Nonsense.
The girl said in a voice.
Illogical nonsense. The world can't be that way. I refuse to believe it. I refuse to live in a world where no one is waiting for me, where no one thinks about me, where no one loves me, where no one needs me. I refuse to believe that I can't be happy, even if the happiest times are over. I believe that I am not forgotten. I believe that I determine my own future, and I'm saying that it will be bright.
She willfully struck the surface of the lake with her wings heavy with water, stirring up its sleeping surface. She turned away from the detective, flapping her wings, and was about to take off when the front of her eyes turned black sharply.
That was the last thing she remembered, and no one takes that memory away from her anymore.
The eagle said, putting the puzzle pieces together. Unfortunately, he already had a prime suspect at the moment. Impulsive, wayward, with a heightened sense of justice and incapable of empathy. The one who was rushing towards him right now.
I know who did this!
The old detective shouted, and characteristically fast, approaching the eagle, who was sitting on a rock near the lake and surrounded by his agents.
Of course.
Muttered the eagle.
Keep involving yourself in the investigation and switching suspicions from one to the other. Keep proving to me that I'm right about you.
When you left me alone in the middle of the lake,
The detective began to tell the story, as usual, to demonstrate his genius and ingenuity.
I looked around and thought about the case. Of course, one could assume that everything happened by accident. But it is hardly possible to kill a bird sitting in the middle of a lake by pure chance. So I decided there was some motive after all. And although I couldn't follow the suspects, I began to wonder what was so special about the victim. And then it dawned on me. I understood what made her the target of the criminal. She was a bird with a human head.
Proudly straightening up, the detective said,
That's right.
muttered the eagle.
That's what was forbidden, and that's what he didn't like. And his stubbornness didn't make the situation any better. Well, at least he thought of appealing to the uniqueness of the victim. After all, he learned something from the lessons at the Academy of Detectives.
The eagle exhaled wearily.
Give up.
The eagle said sternly.
It's enough to try to confuse me. I have already checked all the suspects, and none of them did anything suspicious. No one had an obvious motive to quite accurately kill a rather big bird from a long distance.
The detective was distraught.
Are you serious?
He asked in an unnaturally high voice.
Do you seriously think that after so many years of serving the heavenly office, I would kill? This is nonsense, illogical nonsense,
Said the detective, nervously moving from side to side, stirring the already disturbed water.
Listen, you two argued. She broke the law and didn't want to listen to you. You got angry, wanted to detain her, wrapped your neck around her, and unintentionally strangled her. This is a mitigating circumstance for the court.
Stated the eagle.
I didn't try to strangle her. I wrapped my neck around her when she had already fallen, to check the pulse, to hug goodbye in the end.
The detective shouted.
This is ridiculous.
The eagle replied irritably.
Such a sentimental act as hugging, especially an already dead body, is completely ridiculous and contradicts your character. You are a soulless, indifferent, callous person.
How is it possible to react when someone calls you indifferent?
Thought the detective.
Maybe their words say actually nothing about me, but surely they say a lot about him. He is cruel and soulless as he didn't hesitate to say these to me. How dare you say that?
The detective shouted, hitting the water with his wings.
Who are you to judge me?
Do you even know what happened to your family, whom you abandoned when you thoughtlessly went to Australia for a new case, ready to do anything to get into this damn detective academy? Do you know?
The eagle screamed, glaring at the detective. The detective, looking down and hunched over, just stared silently at the fierce eyes of the eagle.
No? Well, let me tell you. They all died. Why did you think your children didn't visit you? Because they don't care about you? Is this how you felt about them? Well, you were wrong. They just died. Your wife couldn't handle feeding them all, and you just flew to Australia. How long have you been absent in their lives? For 7 years? Maybe more, since after Australia you immediately rushed to the academy? All for the sake of your dreams, in order to have the power to do justice. How selfish it is. I am very ashamed that you have not grown up and have not learned to take responsibility.
The detective was silent. He wasn't a cat now or in a previous life, but at that very moment, a lump rose in his throat. His eyes filled with tears. The detective stifled a cry. He didn't want to show his hurt to the eagle. It was better not to let others know that they meant something to you, that you were vulnerable to them, that they have some kind of power over you. Therefore, right now, he was planning to regain his position of strength. Reminded of his abandoned family, he thought of Australia.
That's another reason to hate this continent. I wish it would disappear from the face of the earth as soon as possible.
He thought.
Disappeared from the face of the earth.
Clinging to his thought, the detective remembered the words of this graceful stranger about a large coral reef. An idea came to his mind. He collected his thoughts and found strength to reply.
I'm sorry to hear that.
He said,
But you're no better than me. You are incompetent and soulless yourself. Look at the world. Isn't it your job to take care of it? Isn't it your job to make sure that people don't mess up anything here? To watch them? And how are you doing? Global warming is in full swing, and animals are for sure immensely happy in the factories of death, and the meat grinders of war all over the planet have already become the norm for resolving disagreements. And deadly viruses are still roaming the world, while people are still continuing to develop antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Great job! Bravo!
The detective continued sarcastically while flapping his wings.
You know, perhaps in this case, I am another proof of the wretchedness of your education system. I'm only the fruit of what you have sown, and you can only blame yourself for this.
The eagle stared intently into the detective's cheeky eyes, and he wasn't going to answer anything.
Nevertheless, I want to be better than you. I don't take your anger and your harsh words personally. On the contrary, I generously forgive you for just being who you are. So I'm going to tell you what I was going to tell you before you started throwing accusations at me.
The eagle tilted its head to the side, waiting for him to continue.
Gadwell showed me a photo that elderly tourist left on the tower. I recognized both his son and his daughter. The daughter was the same girl who ate schnitzels in her sleep. And the son was one of those students who were rescued from an abandoned German castle by a wayward angel.
Of course.
The eagle reflected.
How could I forget this guy's face? And yet, suspicious coincidences.
Without giving the eagle any opportunity to answer the detective, with a piercing scream, the gull landed on a rock near the detective. She had just nearly swallowed the underwater agent who found the murder weapon while fishing.
A pink boomerang!
The detective repeated enthusiastically after the gull.
This only confirms my guess. This old entrepreneur is firstly from Australia, where everyone's just obsessed with boomerangs. Secondly, his daughter adored everything pink. Thirdly, his daughter was not saved by a bird with a human face. And to take revenge, this Australian entrepreneur began building bird-watching towers around the world in search of the one he wanted to kill. And in the end, he killed.
The detective happily reasoned an unseemly tragic moment. Once again convinced of his insensitivity, the eagle was surprised that this wayward detective was right.
Maybe he's not so hopeless. Although it is strange, however, that everything incredibly came together to this detective and the tourist. But the detective could not arrange it himself. This is definitely beyond his abilities. Well, since all the details and gaps in the story have been closed, the evidence has been found, it's time to close the case.
The eagle screamed loudly. Immediately, he was surrounded by several pigeons. According to the rules of the Heavenly Office, all people suspected during the investigation had to receive a white mark of innocence. Then the eagle sent the pigeon agents, who proceeded to fly over each of the suspects and confirm their innocence. The eagle himself went like an arrow to the penthouse of an Australian entrepreneur to lay on his already heavy heart the most terrible and unbearable sin of murder. The detective, with the rest of the birds, remained sitting on the lake. He was looking at the photo that the gate wall had given him earlier.
It's amazing.
He thought,
But it's like I've been preparing for this very thing all my life. As if the stars had come together, so that I was the one who was able to solve the murder and become a real detective in the eyes of everyone. As if the stars had come together like that.
he repeated.
And yet, I wonder who lights the stars every night and why.
He raised his grey eyes to the night sky, and that night the stars were there.
The light from them reaches us anyway. No matter how far away they are, no matter how much time has passed, and no matter how indifferent and useless we consider them.
The detective laughed to himself.
Well, maybe she was right about her friends and family. No matter how far away they are from us, no matter how distant our common past may seem, the light and warmth from them still reach us.
The detective continued to stare silently at the stars, thinking that maybe his family was among the stars now, and maybe they will be so generous to forgive his fear of vulnerability to them. The waves on the surface of the lake finally subsided, and the water calmed down. Did you find it to be a compelling story? I managed to confuse everyone, didn't I?
Especially
Changing my voice
From character
To character.
And my choice of voice for the narrator.
Do you like it? I hope you do. I found a certain necessity in imitation. Not being naturally gifted, I extract the best traits from those around me to construct my own. I was particularly captivated by my good friend, the old detective. Eventually, I succeeded in deceiving him, which I must admit was rather satisfying. But enough about this old bird. Surely you have seen beyond the surface. You have discerned who the culprit really was. Could anyone truly believe the enduring nature of the thirst of vengeance that would compel someone to build bird-watching towers worldwide in the hope of finding a single bird with a human face? If this were true, would the same man also entrust his cause to a boomerang over more precise and deadly weapons like a gun? Of course not. Unfortunately, gratitude and mutual tenderness remain the longest-lasting sentiments that drive people to do something good in this very world. But you must admit, the use of a pink boomerang was rather inventive. They looked at a family picture and saw only the dead girl, failing to consider the possibility that this man still had a son saved. What could one do against years of professional experience clouding judgment with bias? Or as they often call it, professional deformation. Having revealed so many terrible human affairs, they both got used to seeing the worst in people. A single false evidence could disrupt the entire narrative. A whimsical convenience, and the truth is bent. Or perhaps they just want to accept it as the truth. How easily we trust coincidences, drawing signs, seeing patterns, even when they're not there. How these imaginary conveniences quietly dull our skepticism and entice us to chase their comforting presence. There is no greater torment in the world than remembering happy times and not being able to experience it again. Is that so? Despite the bliss of ignorance in this world, I do hope that the girl will grow to experience the greatest joy and the deepest sorrow in her new life. Perhaps then remembrance will lose its meaning. A forced oblivion only leads to a confusing and painful existence. Does it make heaven any better than hell? For those who prefer to forget, like me and that Australian entrepreneur, It is a torment. He only became generous and thoughtful in the autumn of his life, trying to seek atonement for the way he reveled in his luxuries. He was, well, let's say it's better this way. He had started to lose himself, just like I once did. Perhaps a false belief in his part might release him from his mental chains. I know that, even in his generosity, he couldn't escape the memory of who he once was. As for the poor detective, he needed a sense of worth, a reminder of victory achieved through desperation, the reignition of hope, the desire to continue despite the severing of a limb or sustained existence fueled by delusion. I remember him in his past life. His old wounds and self-hatred seem to linger on. I like to believe that it is his love for himself that got him here in the first place. My good old friend, you are still trying to hide your sentimental nature. A pink boomerang. A symbolic gesture on my part. Everything in life comes back to you in kind. Your words, your actions, your emotions. Like Faust and Mephistopheles, aren't we the perfect representation of human temptation and transgression? Well, I've played my part. A soul was freed from one torment, only to experience another. The bloodthirst of a vengeful man had been sated, and a weary man found a way back from a hollow remorse to a passionate apathy. I guess these are more than enough for me to secure a place in Evil Academy. Oh yes, you probably want to know about what happened to that girl. Allow me to tell you, for the sake of completeness. The girl, surrounded by rocky and cold sunny Sweden, woke up from another nightmare. Abruptly rising from the bed, she clutched her neck. Surprisingly, she felt a pleasant warmth enveloping her. She decided to focus on this pleasant feeling in order to move away from the terrible feeling of death coming too close. Taking her hand away from her neck and fixing her black curly hair, she picked up the phone lying next to her. The call was still on, but only peaceful snoring could be heard from the other end. She seems to have calmed down. Swiping down the notification bar, she was met with the same sad inscription of loneliness. No older notifications. Exhaling sadly, she went to the kitchen to put boiling water for tea. To drink a strong cup of tea so as not to fall asleep and not to get back into this world of nightmares. That's what she wanted. The sound of a notification came from the room. Without any hope that the message might be from her friends who decided to find out how she was doing, she indifferently continued to stand by the pot of water. But in the depths of her soul, of course, there was a flame of hope. The hope that one of them texted her, that someone had thought of her. But immediately, this flame of hope was extinguished by the cold rationalism of her analytical mind.
They have their own lives now, their own worries. It is unlikely that at least one of them will mention my name in conversation or recall something from common memories, waking up in the morning or falling asleep late at night. It is unlikely that feelings of affection and love will continue to live, being in a crazy circle of life and being separated by kilometers. Or maybe it's still possible. They all seemed so sweet and caring.
The hope again started to flare up. Fortunately, the water was already boiling. She was now officially allowed to go back to her room to take Indian tea and check the notification at the same time. Restraining a burst of hope, she calmly entered the room, took tea, and, as if by chance, lowered the notification bar again. Rune Air offer for discounted tickets. No, she shouldn't have let hope in her mind, because the result is always the same. The pain of disappointment. That's the problem with hope. It always stays. It refuses to give up. It refuses to die. Not by a coincidence, it was the very last thing left in Pandora's box. What a stupid thing hope is. She threw the tea leaves into a pot of water. Water that was annoyed and worried by hope. She quickly returned to the room. She opened an email from Rune Air and anxiously began looking for tickets in the direction she was interested in. The discount was quite generous. She suddenly decided to admit the idea of flying to her friends herself. But on the other hand, it would be too painful and embarrassing.
They already have their own little life, their new shared memories, their new local jokes. I am no longer a part of their friendship. And moreover, they will definitely try to show me how fun and great they spend time together without me. Which also means that they don't really need me, don't really miss me. And even if I visit them, what should I do there? Would they really care about figuring out what to do together with me? No. They've already had fun together, and they're unlikely to want to plan anything specifically for me.
In general, they never singled out anyone from the group, but treated everyone the same. The only thing she could count on was, perhaps, pity on their part that they were there together, and she was here alone. But she doesn't need anyone's pity. She is quite happy that she has changed during these months in Sweden, and she was proud of where she was going in life. Sometimes the past has to be left in the past, no matter how hard it is. Make this painful decision once and no longer torment yourself, but open the way to the future. Leave the past in the past, and move on towards new people, new events, new places. She checked to see if there were tickets for Peru. Surprisingly, there was still the last ticket with a transfer in Spain. She had always dreamed of seeing Machu Picchu. Maybe it is time to fulfill a dream. The water continued to foam and boil. The smell of fragrant tea reached her room. It was time to add milk and make a decision. She firmly clicked pay, double-tapped the button on the right, and ran to the kitchen to take care of the tea. Her memory was completely bad, though. She almost forgot to put spices in the tea. How could she? But like most mistakes in life, it was fixable. And while she was fixing this one, slicing a ginger root with a sharp knife, which she was holding tightly with her 7 fingers, a new notification of the other mistake came to her phone. It was an electronic ticket to France. I think she should have listened to the old detective. She shouldn't have been so prideful and stubborn. This might have saved her from hell.